sometimes there isn't a problem, but there is a grievance. Problems need to be solved, a grievance need to be heard. And sometimes there's nothing that you need to do except to acknowledge and empathize and validate that somebody's having a hard time. And that's all you need to do.
Welcome back to Wise and Shine. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut.
And I'm Dawn, SG Budget Babe. Today on set, we have someone who's going to tell us about stress. Reggie, what are we going to discuss about today?
You don't know the title, huh?
Never memorize. You got a notebook, okay?
So
I
today
can see off cam.
we're going to talk about stressed out, right? How can leaders kind of keep their team calm under pressure? And we have a very interesting guest in the studio, right? I never thought, we could get her on set, and I saw her change over time. I thought this was quite interesting. So, Carrie, you want to introduce yourself for our audience that don't know you?
Okay. Hello. Hi, I'm Carrie. You may not know about this other hat that I'm wearing, but I'm actually a healing coach and a transformation coach, plus speaker and trainer. And I have a bone to pick about the title of this podcast, which is what again? How do stressed out leaders keep their teams calm?
Yeah.
Right. First, I don't like the word stress, and I think keeping calm is not the objective. But what I would like to share about, since we're given the opportunity, is how we can keep our teams, ourselves first of all, and our teams performing at optimality.
Okay, great. But before we go there, I just want to understand a little bit of your journey, because from what I understand, you founded Daughters of Tomorrow, right? That's kind of how everybody.
Yeah, the organization
Yeah.
with my charitable donation.
Apparently, she donates to the organization. How do you? And then you join the politics. And how do you end up in doing this spiritual coach thing?
Okay.
Feels a bit sporadic, like different things.
There's been a lot that happened.
Yeah.
And the only way I can say it is the transition from running an NGO and a charity to getting into politics, and then having the sheer number of people that I'm having to look after and to take care of, and the scale of my responsibilities having expanded really quickly, like literally overnight, was actually hugely stressful. So that was the catalyst to me trying to find a way to work on myself. Like, how do people do this, right? Because many of my colleagues who are parliamentarians have full-time jobs, very demanding day jobs, like they are professional bankers, lawyers, and running organizations or teams. And we are MPs on top of that. So how do people manage this, right? And plus, one of the things that was very important to me was I saw the very real risk and danger of being so overwhelmed by, so many people's problems coming at you, and that it's very easy to become desensitized as a way to just cope, right? And I didn't want to lose that part of myself that was able to connect and really feel for people. Because I'm, people are familiar with the word empath. So when we connect very easily with people's emotions, it can be very draining. And I'm sure a lot of people in the social work sector, for example, or anybody who is more emotionally sensitive to others, will find themselves with this struggle. And that was one of the biggest challenges that I felt going into politics. So I decided that I needed to find a way to expand my capacity. Like, how am I going to do this work well and be well? That's when I kind of stumbled into self-work, which is really the work of discovering, knowing, understanding, being aware of, and then healing yourself so that you can, I think, free yourself from a lot of the unhelpful things, unhelpful thoughts, unhelpful narratives, and unhelpful beliefs that actually cause a lot of drain in our everyday lives and causes emotional and energy burnout.
Fair. And actually, before we were recording, you were even saying that some of these problems, they're not just amongst people that are struggling, right? They're also, like even the people that are so quote unquote successful, right? Higher up in society's ladder, they also struggle with a lot of these type of inner confusion and all
I
this
think
dissonance.
if you are human, you struggle inside. I have, clients who are in senior leadership positions. They will be seen as very successful. In fact, they come and they say, I'm supposed to be having this super enviable life, but something is off. I'm not happy, or there's something I'm really struggling with. And I've come to realize when I'm working with different individuals is that we're very good at masking and pretending. And which is why it also leads to me sharing in talks to corporates and companies about authentic communication, because I realized that many people, I think most people, just go about life with many different masks on to put up a certain front that they believe will help them either gain an advantage or not be judged or perform better for different reasons. And I think unpeeling those layers of masks is an important work, because then it helps people to connect more genuinely with one another. And I've seen that when we do that, it can create very, very different and much more positive outcomes than when we keep pretending.
So objectively, you don't think there's room to pretend? Because a lot of these people, like you said, right, they are so-called socially successful, right? Because of the social parameters, they move up, they lead very big organization. They are seen as, wow, the boss, right? And like you've established, the assumption is some of them pretend, right, when they get there, right? So you don't think there's value in putting up a persona, or just help us understand what is
I think there
the
is. That's not
nuance?
what I'm saying. I think there is value to being adaptable and using different facets of yourself to relate to different people in different situations and interactions. When I say pretending, I'm not saying that people intentionally pretend. This is something that is happening unconsciously. And sometimes we believe the people that we think we are, or we believe that what people think we are. So, really, self work is about peeling away all of that to connect within yourself to a space of who you truly are without the layers of social conditioning or different kinds of conditioning that has led you to think that you are this way and that. Which, so for example, one of the things that I worked through when I was running Daughters of Tomorrow was this belief that I am terrible with math, I'm terrible with Excel sheets, I cannot do finance. And when we have that belief, it creates certain reactions in us. So we would like try to avoid it. We don't want to do this kind of task. We will like procrastinate on these things. But when we are put in a situation where you can no longer put it off, like for example, I was like one-man show running a charity, I needed to put financial projections together. So I needed to learn. And one of the key things that I discovered is that if we stopped believing the lies we tell ourselves about ourselves, there is so much more possibilities for what we can become. So that's one of the key things that was very helpful. And even at that time, I wasn't intentional about my self-work. And later on, of course, when I became more intentional about self-work and discovering myself, then there were so many unconscious beliefs that I started to peel away and realized that, hey, I could be so much more than I imagined myself to be, or other people imagine myself to be.
I think in that example, like you were aware of that holding you back. But for some people, they don't even know. Right? They tell themselves all these unconscious thoughts and they don't even realize that they're holding
No,
themselves
but the
back.
question is, right, if you are unaware, does it even matter? Right? You get what I mean? Because if you're unaware, fundamentally means it's not disturbing you, right? Some of these
No,
thoughts are
not
just
true.
operating
Not
at
true.
the
I've met
background.
people where until I point out to them, they don't realize that they are their own obstacle. Yeah, like for example, I have mentees that I talk to and coach, right? I'm not a coach, but I mentor them in personal capacity.
You still mentor, you do
And
so many things, still mentor. Wow. Girl does everything.
teammates,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And some of them like to say like, oh, I cannot sell. I'm not a good speaker like you. I can't write as well as you do. I can't communicate like you do. And I'm like, why do you think that? Because everyone communicates in a different way. What is good? Why do you think you cannot sell? You're selling yourself every day, right? You're selling yourself to your kids, to your spouse, to your employer. Everyone that you're talking to, it's sales. You just don't see it. And once they overcome that mindset, then I really see that huge change. Yeah, but it takes, some of them I say already, they still don't get it. Yeah, so I think it's not true. You may have unconscious thoughts holding yourself back, like what Carrie was saying. But if you don't have the awareness of that, it could still hold you back, and you'll never know, like, how can I never get that opportunity, or why am I always failing in this aspect, and you'll never be able to troubleshoot.
Okay, fair. Yeah. So before this podcast become a total different parameter.
Going
No, because
back,
I like these things, but it's a very different parameter.
go back to the topic.
Come back to the topic. In the opening, you were saying like you don't like the word stress, right? So you're trying to reframe the thought process, right? So why do you not like the word stress?
Well, stress is something that exists. I don't think we want to avoid thinking about it or just invalidate it. It's just that if we don't want something to be in our lives, then there are a few ways to go about it. You could do positive reframing and force yourself to, you know, uh, imagine that stress is not stress, which is a bit artificial, or you could actually replace that with something else, right? So I think stress is also like quite misunderstood. Like some people think about stress and it's like, oh, we want to avoid it entirely, but there is such a thing as healthy stress, because healthy stress then propels us to, in terms of like being motivated to do anything, being motivated to grow ourselves, being motivated to perform or accomplish something beyond what we thought was possible within ourselves. That involves some level of stress. It's only when stress becomes counterproductive and counterfunctional, then it becomes a.
So in your own role, because you deal with having to run your own business, and then you're also in the public eye quite a lot, which I can imagine is quite stressful. What do you
I'm
tell
sure.
yourself? How do you how do you reframe this for yourself?
I don't reframe it. What happened was a journey of discovering where the sources of stress were. And I discovered that 90% of the stress was internal, meaning they came from our own expectations of ourselves, our own beliefs about how things are supposed to be, or, or certain conditioned ideas about, having to be this or having to be that. And when I realized that a lot of it just exists in my head more than anybody else's, and how come they exist there, then when we do the work of unpeeling and healing from our own experiences and wounds, then actually there's very little stress in my life. I would say that I have work to do. I have obligations to meet. I have duties to perform. I have things that I'm passionate about. But none of these things are particularly stressful when you know the tools of understanding your own emotions and the ability to detach yourself from the situation to see it more objectively. So when we talk about awareness just now, and Dawn was mentioning like awareness, people think that you either have awareness or you don't have awareness. And it's not really so binary, because awareness is a matter of like levels. Yeah, you could have like a little bit of awareness, or like very deep awareness, or very high awareness. And the higher awareness you have, the more awareness you have, the better able you are at managing yourself and regulating your own emotions and regulating yourself. So when you are very adept at that, then things hardly become stressful.
A lot of what you said sounds like a very individual journey that the person needs to take themselves. But what about in the context of this topic, where how can the leaders help their team members who are stressed out, or who are, okay, I shouldn't use the word stress, who are facing challenges, who are being who are right, who are facing pressure,
And sometimes it's not individual, right? Sometimes it's the whole situation is stressful, right?
Situational stress.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamic forces at play, right? So yeah, from a leader's perspective, how do you think leaders can go about managing this situation?
Well, I think the most important thing for any leader to do is to understand themselves. It all starts from the self. And I think in different management philosophies and all that, they will talk about self-leadership, right? And people talk about self-leadership like, oh, you got to know how to manage your own time, you got to have your own discipline, you got to have your own vision, etc., which are all very important. But I think to date, at least in Asian societies, the notion of emotional self-awareness is not yet very mainstream or common. And I think one of the key things that leaders really need to do is to develop a high level of emotional self-awareness. Because when you are able to understand your own emotions, manage your own emotions, then it doesn't spill over to other people. No, so people don't have a adequate understanding of how emotions work. But I think if I use a very simple analogy, like say for example, when I first walked into the room, or when you walk into any room and the people inside, you've sensed something off. Like the couple inside have just been fighting. There's just been a lot of anger and words and all that. And you don't need to do anything. You just step into the room, you sense something is off, you're not comfortable. Even if you had like a completely cordial conversation with them, it's just very weird. So that is energy at work. That is the energy of anger in the room that is not spoken about, not tended to. It just becomes like stifling or whatever it is. So when we work in teams, when we work in an environment, whether it's a physical environment or a group environment, and we are completely unaware of the role that emotions have to play in how people feel, which is invisible, then we completely have ignored a very important element of what makes workplaces great to be in.
I understand that, right? But I'll just close the door, lah, right? If you enter the room, it's like, never mind, lah, okay, y'all continue, close the door. But this whole understanding yourself thing, right? It's like you've kind of pointed out, and many other people talk about this, an onion peeling type of process, right? You go through the whole process. So actually, the right question to think about is how much is enough, right? At what point are you then a good enough position to then lead well, right?
I love that question because it tells me something about you, which is a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
common thing because a lot of people have this question: what is good enough? Am I good enough? When am I going to be good enough? So aren't you curious? Why is it that that's something that so many people ask? Why do we constantly question whether we are good enough? It seems to be so prevalent, right? That I think people have some theories about it, about, imposter syndrome, all these are various manifestations of self-doubt, right? When actually life itself is an unfolding process. Leadership is an unfolding process. We as a human and an individual is an unfolding process. And what I want to share with the audience is whenever and wherever you find yourself, you already have whatever you need to do whatever you're required to do in that moment. So if you didn't doubt yourself, you could just do it, right? So this is something that is very common. I see in a lot of my clients as well. And usually there are different experiences from their formative years that contributes and created this questioning. And I think in Asian societies, especially when a lot of our upbringing come from parenting that's focused on whether a child does well, then a child grows up for a large part of his life kind of basing himself on whether they're adequately meeting the expectations
Oh my gosh,
of somebody else.
You want to elaborate?
Exactly how much there. I was always questioning as a kid, right? As a daughter, was I good enough? If I didn't score A, am I a bad daughter? I let my parents down. And actually, when I brought back my report card, right, I remember A2. First thing I won't say which parents. First thing my parents singular asked me was, why not A1? I'm like, I'll never be good enough. Yeah, that was last time.
That's a very common childhood
Yeah,
experience
very
of many,
Asian.
I think, Singaporeans
Yeah,
and Asian
yeah,
kids, right? And that actually has a tremendous effect on us growing up. Like we're constantly asking, when am I good enough? And my question back to you is, for who?
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show. Fair. So I think on the individual paradigm, right, it's a forever evolving cycle, right? You will keep improving and all that. But when we bring it to a office context or within a structural context, right, then there are lines to evaluate what is good and what is not good enough, right? So when we bring that back, right, do you think there are certain parameters of a corporate leader that will make them good as a leader in managing their emotions, to keeping their team together during stressful times? Are there certain, parameters that you will observe that you think, oh, 这个不错, like that?
Well, I think or what I've come across as leaders who people like to work with are those who are able to relate, able to empathize, and communicates well. I think not just like in terms of just saying things, but communicates and is able to hold space for people, right, to make mistakes, etc. To give you a case in point, I've met individuals who are progressing in their careers and they're super competent in their jobs and their various expertise. But when they get promoted into a team leader's role or having to manage others, they really, really struggle. And a real case that I came across was this person just doesn't know how to attend to people's emotions. So, for example, he has two team members who are not happy with each other or having a misunderstanding or a conflict, and one of them comes to him for help. He doesn't know what to do, and he just avoids. So he just avoids the whole matter. And what he observes then is it doesn't get tended to; it just spirals, right? And then people get upset, and then there's no teamwork, right? So I think the ability to understand human emotions and be able to help people see something about themselves and be able to facilitate interactions of individuals is hugely important. It's not just about how well you do the job, because at that level, at a certain level in a career, if you're managing people, you're managing people. And people are, I don't know what's the percentage, but a large part of people are about emotions.
Okay, fair, interesting.
Yeah, I agree. The holding space, I think, is really important.
I think I'm great at it, just saying.
Okay, good. Continue.
Yeah, you can
but
say.
many leaders can definitely improve on that. Yeah, I think also many leaders in the corporate workforce, right? They tend to lead based on what they know. So they learn from others, like when they were not a leader yet, and whoever was the leader, then they tend to adopt similar stuff that work. And they don't realize that a lot of things have changed. Like last time was not cool to admit that you're vulnerable. Last time, remember we had this on the recent podcast episode. There's no such thing as a mental health break. But now
Oh,
have
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So a lot of
Vivek.
changes in the workforce and they don't relate. So it's like, what, you broke up with your boyfriend, girlfriend? Yeah, lah, deal with it lah. Instead of the new gen is I need 1 day off to, recover. So that is what I usually see. They lead based on what they know or have had experience in. And they don't realize that honestly, today I think there's more focus on being authentic, on being vulnerable, on being in a workplace whereby you can actually be yourself and not have to be fake. Yeah, and some leaders still haven't yet stepped up to that.
No, okay, from a leader standpoint, right, I think one question to think about, right, is how much problem is my problem?
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
But you have to admit that while you let your teammates, they are adults, right? So they can deal with their own problems. But also sometimes people have good days and bad days.
Yeah, it's
right?
true,
And
it's true.
sometimes like the leader, like what Carrie mentioned that in the example, may need to step in. So let's say if, like that two teammates fight, and 1 week later they still on bad terms, maybe the leader really need to step in and see what he can do to bridge
So
that.
what I've discovered in my own leadership journey and also combined with my insights as a self-work coach is that sometimes there isn't a problem, but there is a grievance. Problems need to be solved, a grievance need to be heard.
Mm.
And sometimes there's nothing that you need to do except to acknowledge and empathize and validate that somebody's having a hard time. And that's all you need to do. Because I think when it comes to emotional management, people see when you talk about problem solving, it's like, oh, cerebral, right? You present me a problem. How much of it is my problem? There's no problem. The only situation here is somebody is feeling down, is feeling unheard, and wants a listening ear, and wants somebody to know that he or she is feeling a certain way. There is nothing else that's needed except to say, I hear you.
I love it. That's like the punchline, man. It's not a problem. It could just be a grievance.
Well, then, of course, the HR people will say, oh, grievance means we need to handle the grievance, right? So there are different things. There are some staff who come to you and say, I expect something to be done. But most of the time, once people are heard and they've released their emotion and they feel validated, the wonderful thing about emotions is it dissipates. is not permanent. It's only when they don't air it and is not acknowledged or validated that it becomes submerged and people just keep that stored away and then it comes out in unhelpful manners. Then that's when a toxic culture forms.
So to be fair, I don't disagree with you, yeah. But at some point, it's a question of scope creep, right? As a manager, suddenly your girlfriend problem is my problem. Your your household problem is my problem because I
No, I changed the word. It's not a problem.
No.
It's a grievance,
Okay, okay.
situation.
To be fair,
a
that's
temporary situation.
And I used to be in that situation too, where I thought that anyone who came to me telling me of their troubles expected me to solve it. So that I realized was an inner thing. Actually, they don't. Actually, they just want to be comforted.
yeah, fair. So I don't dispute that. And in fact, I understand what's going on, right? I just have not moved on to a new vocabulary. Okay, so it's just how you load and how you premise on some of these
you
words.
You just don't want to be their uncle agony. Is that what you're trying to say?
No. So let's put it this way, right? In the past, the idea is, your life is your life, right? You come to work, be professional, get it done, and move on, right? But now leaders are expected to care and hear the person out, and people are objectively bringing more and more of their struggles in life to work, right? So there are multiple situations where my guys would like totally zone out at work. Then I have to be like, hey, what's going on? So, my mom yesterday shout at me, say I'm worthless, blah, blah, blah. Wow, this one also my tai chi, yeah? Right? No, because to be fair, the things at the household is very complicated. I am in no position to intervene unless you ask for help on a personal level, right? I don't think I'm going into your boss to talk to your mom, right? So that's that. But whatever they bring, because now it is considered okay, or in fact considered correct to bring your full self to work, suddenly this set of problems affect your work. So I'm not concerned about your set of problems. I'm only concerned about how you react as a result of that at the workplace.
Okay, can I share my input as an employee?
Yes, 来讲.
Okay? Because I'm both a manager and an employee. So the team is also important. Not every situation, not every grievance, not every problem goes to the leader. That's where we have good relationships with our colleagues as well. They can be our emotional support. Someone in the 20s who is dealing with maybe hate comments on TikTok over a dance video that he or she just did yesterday, they go and talk to that 40-something-year-old manager. He may not relate. They will go and talk to their 20-something-year-old here who actually understand or have been through it before, right? But it's more of if the situation comes for it, then the leader should also be accessible and where it's applicable. So for instance, for myself, my teammates have some struggles in terms of more environmental because they're overseas, right? And I cannot relate because Singapore is just so safe, right? When it says heavy rain, got all the flooding and everything, I'm like, Singapore at the most got bonding, that's it. But it doesn't come to my house, right? I cannot relate. So I really have no idea what are all the troubles that they go through, that it's cold, that they're always wet. But the team holds the space for them when it happens because they're like, yeah, it happened to me last month too.
Yeah.
I hear where Reggie is coming from. Where do we draw the line? You're here 8 hours a day, maybe 10 hours that you want work-life balance, but then half the 8 hours you are moping about something that happened in your personal life when I'm expecting some kind of work to be produced out of you. So as a boss, as a manager, as having work to account for, how do you manage that, right? So what you're bringing up is very poignant and it's very real because I do meet many individuals who struggle to identify and hold boundaries, whether it's personal boundaries or of time, energy, emotions, or understanding that there is appropriate places and appropriate times for different things, right? So I think especially I don't want to say especially I think it happens across ages, but I think if you are younger in age and with less life experiences, you tend to focus a lot on your own personal experiences, and you may not have be so familiar with how do you kind of compartmentalize your time as to what is the thing that in front of you that's needing your attention now, and you have your personal matters spill into the workplace. So, I think some boundaries are important, compartments are important, So it's important to know that when you're at work, what is your relationship with the workplace? Like, what is the expectation? You need to perform to a certain amount of reasonableness as to what you're remunerated. And I think having an awareness of that when your emotions are spilling over in an unhelpful manner to affect your work presence, right? That's something to be mindful about, right? But I think also people tend to compartmentalize so much that they perform at work, and then they forget to look in the other drawer where they were feeling awful this morning, right? And it just becomes like submerged emotions. So I encourage, in my corporate talks to do this practice of emotional hygiene, which is, well, you need to perform at work. You need to be there. You need to focus. You need to do all the things. But there's a part of you that feels something, like feels uncomfortable or feels sad or feels whatever about an interaction. Now you don't want to like keep it in your drawer and forget about it. You want to bring it up at the end of the day in your own private time, private space, and look at it and say, oh, okay, this is what I was feeling, and acknowledge it and process it a little bit so that it doesn't get stored away.
Fair, yeah. So I don't disagree. Just a lot of these things, I just feel like over time it's just getting stacked up, right?
Yeah, but
Like,
you gotta give your people credit
Yeah,
also.
yeah,
They
yeah.
also have their friends at the workplace.
Of course. So I'm not discrediting them.
The good thing about it, Reggie, is that if your staff feels so comfortable sharing with you, it means that there's a significant level of trust.
Of course, yeah. So I'm not saying you cannot share. Just say. I just share. It's a different point of view. Okay, yeah. We're just trying to learn how to manage this whole thing, right? Because it is complicated and it is stacking. It's getting harder. Right. So maybe just want to kind of close off a little bit on the whole stressed out as a leader type of situation, right? Because in a workplace, there are all sorts of facets or forces that will affect, however it is, right? So just for today's episode, I think let's focus on the leader element, right? So leaders tend to carry the KPI. There's a lot of all these expectation and, there are forces from everywhere, trying to they gotta do something about this thing, right? They gotta make it work fundamentally. So somehow there's all these pressure. How do you then manage, yourself? How do you better manage yourself when it comes to like crunch time, high pressure environment, because you work with all these leaders, right? So how would you advise them to go about so that it don't affect the team?
Well, I think the first thing is to know your triggers, right? Know what triggers you particularly to feel anxious or to feel any kind of things that's uncomfortable. So as leaders, I'm not going to say that every leader is like, has no wounds inside. Most of us do because we are human beings, but they may not be conscious of it. So for example, I've come across leaders who, when the big boss gives some feedback, then himself being one of the bosses will get quite triggered. Not that he gets angry, but he'll feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough, right? And the response to this notion that I'm not doing enough because big boss said this would be that I need to do more to prove myself. And then if they're unconscious of that, what could happen is that he loads on more KPIs on his team so that we prove that, and all this is happening on a subconscious level, right? So I'm sure, some of us have met bosses who are like suddenly extra kanchong, load more KPIs or like the time crunch and all that. So then that creates more pressure onto team members, right? Yeah, so that's one example that comes to mind. And
Question. So if the employee identifies that in the leader, what can the employee do to
Fair
make
question.
the leader realize
Fair question.
without offending the leader?
I think we cannot say for sure, because you may assume that as an employee, I see that very clearly, but you really don't know what's going on in
That's a
another
fair
human being's
point,
mind. But if you do feel that whatever your boss is loading on you is unrealistic and you're bursting at the seams and your plate is overfull, what you can do personally and own is your own boundaries, which is like, hey boss, I know this is important to you, but I've got this going on and everything is urgent. Could you help me out and let me know which one is most important to you right now? And then when we have the negotiation, or when you ask that question, then I think that's an invitation for the boss to kind of like take a step back and look at it. Okay, I need to make some prioritizations here, right? So I don't think we go about in our workplace or life trying to tell people what are their flaws or what are because we can never be sure. The only thing that we can be sure of is what's going on in our own minds, right? We cannot speculate or make an assumption, because how we're reading somebody else is usually through our own subjective lens lah. So we might be making a lot of assumptions about other people that are not true either.
That's a great tip.
Mind your own business lah. So when I say my
Draw
own
your
business
own
means like, hey, boss
boundaries
cannot
lah.
ready, but communicate it. Communicate it so that there is an open discussion about it.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
No,
Instead of
and-
saying, hey boss, I think you like that. It's more of like just protect the boundaries. And if it really is that case, let the boss own self discover.
Yeah, fair.
Not
And-
the employee's space to point it out. Because
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, it could be wrong. Could be
Yeah,
stemming
yeah.
from something else.
Yeah, but your perpetual silence perpetuates the problem, right?
Yeah.
Or the perceived problem that you have,
Yeah,
right?
so communicating
yeah.
that will be the first few steps. I love that. That's a great tip.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like it. I think we have more or less
Yeah.
covered the first angle.
Thanks, Carrie, for
Oh,
sharing.
that's it.
Pretty much, I like the discussion, and I'm sure there's more facets to this whole leadership discussion as we move along, right? So, thanks for sharing. Usually at the end, we go one round to kind of point out what further inspired us, or what are one of the pointers that were being discussed that you thought was extra interesting. You want to bring it out in closing. Can be your own pointers, can be other people pointers. And then we go around and share lah. Okay, so yeah, what is yours?
He always makes me go first.
Because the first is the easiest. There are an entourage of.
He says every episode he says the same defense. I think what really stood out to me was the part where you say it's not always a problem. It could be just a grievance and the person just wants to be heard. I think looking at that from that kind of lens changes a lot of things, and will also reduce the leader's own stress towards like, why all my teammates' problem now becomes my problem. Actually, it's just need to listen and done, walk away, continue. Yeah, I thought that was very impactful.
Okay, fair. What about yourself?
Well, I thought it was great that Reggie shared his challenges managing others, and how because of this increasing, I think, openness to see work and life as integrating, the kind of like boundaries are blurred. But I think even though there is more understanding from professional and workplaces towards like people being a whole human being, I think we need to give due respect to what is the focus area in each particular domain of our lives. Like the same, like we don't want to bring too much work into our family time, that we shouldn't be bringing too much more family time into work, but having a conversation to discuss that boundary would be actually helpful for people to know what is acceptable to my particular boss or my particular employee, and just have that mutual understanding. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Oh, your biggest
Okay,
takeaway.
so always like to ask me, right? Okay. I feel like Carrie brought up the thing about triggers, and it's a great reminder, because I personally believe that I have gone through quite a bit of that whole self-work thing, where I try to catch myself on my triggers, and when something happens, like, why am I feeling like that? Right? So I have that whole process, and I personally believe that today I'm a better leader because I've gone through that process, because I'm very aware of like how am I feeling, so that I do not end up projecting the problem onto others, right? But sometimes not more than sometimes, it's still hard to evaluate whether am I projecting or is this really the situation, right? And I think it takes more finesse over time lah. But I think first layer is to be able to observe a trigger and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? And then you kind of work from there. Right? Yeah. So correct, right? Good, right?
Yeah, that's a very good first step. And if you've already found that to be helpful for your growth as a leader, then I would encourage you to take more steps, because you can go deeper.
Great. Yeah. So if let's say our audience want to connect with you on a professional front, where can they reach you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, or you could just reach out to me at Coach Carrie at lbinc.co. My practice is called Light Bearers Collective, or you can just Google Carrie Tan Light Bearers or Carrie Tan Healing Coach. Something will come up.
Nice.
Oh yeah, and I have a TikTok channel called Thriving with Carrie T.
Nice. Okay, you're on TikTok, so everyone's on TikTok.
This is specifically where I put out content related to self-work. So I hope that it helps people.
Great.
Thank you for joining us today, Carrie.
Nice.
See you guys in the next episode.
Yeah, we got one more.